Welcome to Deep Thought, Religion and Behavior. Now, you know what, I might have covered this before, but, on this channel, it's all about getting you to think about things. So if I cover it again, I'm covering it again. But religion and behavior, it's a very important thing because a lot of times when people look at different spiritual paths and religions, even philosophical paths, ethical paths, stuff like that. Even atheism, that's a philosophical path. Being agnostic, that's a philosophical path. It has an effect on behavior. Now, we can argue all day about the, afterlife, whether there's a afterlife or not, and, or the nature of it, how to get there. But if you look at the effect religion has on people on a daily, everyday basis, it affects their behavior. It affects their behavior. And indeed, I would even argue if you take an honest look at the histories of most of the major religions, even some of the small ones, the purpose of them was to really impact people's behavior. Indeed, on a more nefarious tip, to control people's behavior. Because people, like whatever religion people follow or they even grow up in, even if they don't follow it, like going to temple, mosque, circle in the woods, church on a regular basis, they still are culturally that way. Like in this country, we have many cultural Christians. Like they might not step foot in a church or even call themselves Christian. You might say, well, I don't practice anything. But if you look at a lot of the things they do, it's still cultural, such as maybe, not working on a certain day or celebrating Christmas or, how they treat each other, how they treat other people, and, of course, that's not perfect because you get people who say they something and then do something else. But it's a very important thing to consider. Very important thing to really consider. Because I was thinking about that the other day. Because I saw it's a nice looking, attractive black Muslim young lady at a local store. Yeah, giving me that eye. And I'm like, man, it's something about her energy. And I've noticed that when I've been around either African or African American Muslims. There's always a different energy, but then you contrast that with, especially in this country, primarily black Christians. And even then it depends on the denomination and how they do things. It affects their behavior. And even it affects every little thing. Like I've mentioned several times on my men's channel, a young lady friend of mine. I haven't talked to her in a long time. I need to shoot her a text. But she's like hardcore Christian, but one of those type of Christian young ladies in a denomination where they very rarely wear pants. And they'll be in church like almost all the time and stuff. And her behavior as a result is affected because I noticed there's certain guys she won't pay attention to. Like you get some guys, you guys supposed to have that look, that rough look, they better look just as pious and clean cut. But it affects it. And I've seen that with other religions. Like I've been around Muslims, Jews, Christians, African spiritualists, hardcore metaphysics, atheists. And I always peep like certain behavioral things. Like there's certain African spiritual systems as practiced by African Americans where let's just say you don't want to mess with them. Like, and look, let me bring race into it. Let me really bring race into it. How they respond, each group, to the greater society. Because we live in, for now, a predominantly white society. And I notice each group responds to the greater society in a different way. You have, in general, the Muslims, they kind of stay to themselves and stuff, but they so with the greater population. You have the black Christians, they'll behave a certain way, more in line with the greater population. And then you got African spiritualists who, well, I would advise the greater population not to go near them, because they have zero fear of them or zero respect. So it is what it is. So it's, but their behavior, and it's like, it's more than just that, but, not just how they behave towards a great society, but towards each other, how they look at relationships, how they look at work, how they look at themselves. It's so many different things, and it affects so much, because really there's three great things that affect behavior, three major things. One is education. Two is definitely religion, and these aren't in any particular order, but then media. And I've talked about that before, and I'll do that later. But, you have this situation where you could almost tell. Sometimes you can almost tell what someone practices. It even affects how they eat, of course, because, of course, you have, I know one black Hebrew Israelite sect, at least one. There's several, but they all vegan, totally vegan. They don't eat meat at all. And it's interesting how they look at stuff. It affects the relationships, because in some groups, some Hebrew Israelite sects, some African spiritualist sects, and some Muslim sects, definitely, polygamy is normal, whereas in maybe a black Christian group, it's totally monogamy. Now, of course, nobody's perfect with any of those things, but it affects how they look at stuff, how they dress, all of that. And even though I'm using the black community as an example, it's the same thing in all communities with regard to the religion, how people adhere to it, and all of that. It has a great effect on behavior. And it's something to really pay attention to. I'm going to tell you what, and now I'll end by saying this. I'll never forget what an associate of mine said. He was working on a comic book character, and he said he was going to make that comic book character Muslim. Because the thing was, his rationale was, how would a Muslim superhero behave? Now, of course, in the comics now, they'll have like more of a variety, but that was something to think about back then. And even when they had that variety now, they don't really talk about how this person would really behave if they practice this particular path. And it's something to think about. How would they really behave? So, anyway, as always, something to think about. Anyway, y'all, that's all I have for now. I'll talk to y'all later. Peace and blessings.